Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, my dad doesn't run the company I work for, so I'm not as good as other people. How are you?
I'm okay. I don't have the same issues that Brian Ferentz and Kirk Ferentz have with the dynamic that they have at Iowa. And Tom, before I let you go, I just want to alert the listeners. We have begun our spring positional preview shows. This show will eventually, or was intended to be, about the Ohio State quarterbacks. But first, we thought we would discuss the Brian Ferentz, the new contract restructuring that, for one, has taken $50,000 away, of his annual allowance out of his pocket, and demands that Iowa average at least 25 points per game, and they win 7 games this year, or else he will be fired. Tom, your thoughts?
It feels a lot like if I had a dad. I know you're the guy who does the analogies here, but I'm going to steal your thunder here, and I'm going to say if I was a guy whose dad owned a fireworks factory, and my performance in the fireworks business had been subpar. I had been putting out a lot of fireworks that were like dripping water and that type of stuff. Had a lot of dissatisfied customers. And my dad said, well, I've never fired a floor manager before, a factory manager before, and by golly, I'm never going to do it. I don't see any reason to do it. Tony, it's the whole factory. Yes. My son is the one dumping huge buckets of water on the loads of fireworks as we're shipping them out. But I've never fired a fireworks factory manager before, and by golly, I don't intend to start now. I'm gonna take his salary down from $1.5 million to $1.45 million a year. I don't know what his salary is. I assume, based on everything else, I assume it's stupid and ridiculously undeserved. But whatever the number is, I'm going to take it down by $50,000. Now, that sounds like a lot of money to you. You poor people out there who probably only make, I don't know, $50,000 a year. It's like, oh, it's taking away his whole salary. Okay, yes. So this is like a minor rounding error and might cost him the ability to go have his car detailed a couple times a year. Whatever. It doesn't matter. So we're taking that away. And Tony, this year, I am going to demand he does not dump buckets of water on his fireworks. If he does not dump buckets of water on his fireworks this year, he will get a big bonus. If the fireworks work just like half the time, he will get a big bonus. But Tony, if he continues to dump buckets of water on his fireworks, which is a completely unnecessary part of the fireworks manufacturing process, mind you, he will be fired. Your thoughts? Does that seem like a fair deal? That seems like a well-run factory to me.
Well, here's the thing, though, Tom. Where your analogy is a little bit off is that Brian Ferentz could continue to dump water on the fireworks, but as long as Iowa wins 7 games, they're okay with the wet fireworks. It doesn't matter how many points they score per game. As long as they can score 10 points a game, and as long as they win 7, good job. And we'll find a way to get this $50,000 back to you. I don't care if it's, Christmas stocking, probably.
And the 25 points a game thing, is it 25 points a game from the offense? Oh, no, friends. No. It is the Iowa defense, which has been one of the most opportunistic in the nation, and which constantly seems to be scoring safeties, defensive touchdowns. Oh, those count too. So even if his factory produces 0 fireworks this year, if other factories go so far above and beyond, he could still get his bonus because it doesn't have to be him. When Jack Campbell has a strip sack of C.J. Stroud and runs it back, and Brian Ferentz is sitting on the sideline picking his nose and then sticking it in his ear for some reason, doesn't matter. That it all counts, Tony. It all counts.
And frankly, it should. I tweeted about this Sophie's Choice that I want to see Kirk Ferentz go through, where they're 6 points away from, it's the final game of the season. They're 6 points away from that 25 points per game. However, they're also up. Say, they don't necessarily need the points to win that game, but they're faced with like a 4th and 2 from the opponent's 32. And it's like, you don't need points to win the game, but you also would like not to fire your son. And so he's got this, do I punt from the 32, which is my favorite thing to do? Or do we continue to try and score here because I love my son? And so now, I mean, what does he do? I assume begrudgingly he goes for it. Do they make it? No, of course not. It's Brian Ferentz.
Yeah, I saw you post that on Twitter, and it just brought to mind the meme where the guy has the two buttons, and they're two, and he's just, the next panel is him just like sweating and stressing out over the decision he's going to make. Yeah, that feels very much like it's going to be that'll be they'll go for it. They won't get it. It will somehow turn into a strip sack that gets run back, and then they lose the game, and then they only finish with 6 wins instead of 7 wins. That feels spiritually how this deserves to go, and then Kirk Ferentz will learn all the wrong lessons from that, and we'll say, well, we got close enough, and Gary Barter will kind of hand wave it. It's like, well, they're pretty close. We'll just let them keep working, and then Kirk Ferentz will just be punting more from the plus 32. That feels like how this deserves to work out, and then how it actually will work out.
I think here's what's going to happen. They will fall short on that 4th down, and then so now the other team has the ball in offense. They throw what looks to be a pick 6, and as the Iowa defender is cruising into the end zone, Iowa defensive coordinator Phil Parker comes off of the sideline and tackles him to keep him from scoring, so that Brian Ferentz has to be fired. I think that would only be fair, and the refs would be like, you know what? Yes, it's a penalty. But really, Kirk, you got to decline this. Somebody's got to decline this. Like, how do you penalize this guy for just trying to have a better life? That's all Phil Parker wants, just a little bit of help. And now he's actually being proactive about it.
I don't want to spoil the end of this season, but the way this season actually ends is one of these like 9 overtime games, like the Illinois and Penn State played. And it's just going to be a bunch of 3-and-outs in offense for both Nebraska and Iowa, and they're just going to be kicking field goals, and the scoreboard's going to slowly be creeping up, slowly, and they'll just barely get over it in the 8th or the 9th overtime, and 2-point plays and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's going to be Tony. It's going to be the worst thing we've ever seen, and I really can't wait.
And the thing is, what incentive will Matt Rule have for trying to stop any of those 2-point conversions? You're just going to back off of the line. You're going to back into your defense. Your nose tackle is going to be in the back of the end zone.
I've never seen anyone let someone score in overtime before. They let them score defense, yeah. And then will the Iowa players be doing the why boom no take knee? Like, no, we got to run. No, we're going to take a knee at the 1 here. We don't want to subject ourselves to another. This is going to be the resistible force versus the movable object. And man, I did a show a couple weeks ago on the morning show on bad college football and why it's so fun to me. And man, this is going to be the worst bad college football, and it's going to be great.
Brian Ferentz is the irremovable force. So, Tom, let's start the show. Let's
start talking about actual college football and not cartoonishly garbage college football. Yes.
So we are going to go position preview time. We've got 8 shows before the beginning of spring. I do figure at some point we'll probably have to do an extra bonus show of spring bold predictions, because that's got to happen. Also, at some point we got to do our black stripe draft. So these things also have to happen. But we've got some time, so let's do some spring position previews. And rather than us do all of the work, again, this is going to be some listener previews, listener questions to help us get through this. So let's get that started. And Tom, I have done some research, and you're going to see here in just a second.
All right. Well, here's the first one from @Tasman1AC. Do either of the 2 quarterbacks appear to have the edge?
Well, Tom, so I'm writing about these guys and the competition that they have against each other, what makes them difficult competition. And so I'm starting to write that this is the first time since 2018 that the spring is wide open. But I don't believe that. Based on Dwayne Haskins, no, in 2018, I don't believe it was wide open in 2018 because of Dwayne Haskins. So you're like, okay, so it's the first time since 2015. But do you believe that based on what Cardale Jones did in 2014? I mean, Cardale Jones ended up winning the job. Do you believe it when it was Justin Fields in 2019? or CJ Stroud in 2021. Like, they were always at the head. So, Tom, I'm wondering, when is the last time, if we are assuming this year it is completely wide open, or this is the shortest leg up a quarterback has had on another in the spring, when is the last time there has been a wide open spring competition? Because if you want to go back to 2014, that was Braxton Miller. You want to go back to 2011, it wasn't Braxton Miller and Joe Bosserman, that was Joe Bosserman. In 2008, that was Todd Beckman. In 2007, that was Todd Beckman getting the majority of the snaps, with Rob Schoenhoft and Antonio Hinton being the other two. You go back to 2004, that was Justin Zwick, Jim Tressel, because Tom, like I said, I've been web archive all day, web.archive.org all day, looking at old Ozone articles. And Jim Tressel said at the beginning of spring of 2004 that if they had a game today, Justin Zwick would start. And we saw, he ended up winning that job and then losing it. So do you go to 2002, Tom, with Craig Krenzel and Scott McMullen? But what happened the Michigan game in 2001?
Craig Krenzel already had a win over Michigan on the road.
So am I crazy? Does it go back? Is it Stanley Jackson and Mark Garcia? Stanley Jackson and David Priestley and Austin Mockerman? I mean,
yeah, it's Steve Belisari and Austin Mockerman. If we're not counting stuff like 2015, then it's probably Steve Belisari and Austin Mockerman in 1999, because both of those guys played in that first game against Miami in the Kickoff Classic, if I remember correctly. So I think that's probably the answer. Really, I think 2015 is the answer, because, both of those guys had starting experience. Both of those guys, that was legitimately a question right up to the kickoff at Virginia Tech that year. I think really that's the answer. If you want to split the hairs a little finer, you can go back to 1999. But I mean, Steve Belisari at the time felt like he was the front runner, but he felt like he was the front runner based on stuff he had done on special teams, making a bunch of tackles on kickoff. So I'm not sure that was really actually an informed opinion to feel like he was the front runner at that time. So I'm going to say that's the answer. But, if not, then you're going back to when was the last time there was like a legitimate quarterback controversy, back and forth, 2-quarterback system. And then that's Joe Germain and Stanley Jackson, and can't forget Mark Garcia.
But even then, I don't know that John Cooper wanted to have upheaval in the locker room by making Joe Germain the starter in 97. Because I don't even know if he had established himself as a legit guy in 96 at that point. That's when he got there in 95, if I recall, and then in 96 started to make some waves. But going back to 2015, how good would JT Barrett have had to play to make Urban Meyer ignore those 3 games? Just like how good would Joe Burrow had to have played in the spring of 2018 to make Urban Meyer forget that Michigan game for Dwayne Haskins. So I think this is like just the shortest leg up anybody has had. That, and I'm saying Kyle McCord has a short leg up. And to answer the question, do any of the 2 quarterbacks appear to have the edge? However, it's not by any means insurmountable, and it's if you're looking at it in terms of a straight line, there might be just a little hill that Kyle McCord has that Devin Brown would have to get over, but it's nothing insurmountable, and I think it's a slight edge just based on the experience, but it's nothing like anything we've seen in the past 20 some years, I guess, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think there might be a little bit of, sort of retroactive, how it worked out, so therefore it seems obvious that that's how it would have worked out. I think that Kyle McCord has a little bit of an experience advantage. I think Kyle McCord has if it's a tiebreaker, if it really is, the coaches are sitting there and, you go through your 5 tiebreakers and then you get to the coin flip kind of thing. The coin flip here is, well, if you put Kyle McCord in as a starter, you're less likely to lose the other person in the transfer portal because he has more eligibility left, and there's a cleaner path to the playing field in a year. So, if you want to include that in, okay, sure, you can include that in. But it feels like this is pretty wide open. It feels like Kyle McCord probably has a little bit of an experience advantage. We're going to get to one of the areas where Devin Brown has an advantage in the next question. But I think they have had similar quarterback battles to this in the past. I don't think you really need to go back to the mid-90s and, Jackson versus Jermaine to have something that was this close. But, it's certainly one of the most competitive, one of the most wide-open quarterback battles they've had in quite a while.
I'll stop there, Tom, because you're wrong. But please, let's ask the next question.
All right. So the next question is from @LanceNotLance. Does Devin being a great runner even get him any leg up at all when Day seems to be scared of running his quarterback? And I think this is, Devin Brown does have a little bit of an advantage in terms of being a little bit more of a runner. Kyle McCord can run. Kyle McCord is at the very least CJ Stroud mobile and, maybe a little more mobile than that. Devin Brown is probably a little bit more than Kyle McCord, and that's something that the coaching staff kind of referenced in terms of areas where, one guy may have a little advantage in one area than another. I don't know that I think Ryan Day is scared to run his quarterback necessarily. I think that may be, somewhat based on the individual player and what they feel comfortable with doing as well, because they don't want to put guys in positions they're not comfortable with. CJ Stroud, after the Northwestern game this year, talked about the fact that game gave him more confidence in running the ball. So the strong implication there is that he was somehow lacking in confidence in running the ball earlier in the year. So I don't think I would put that all on Ryan Day's doorstep. But the portion that you put on Ryan Day's doorstep also, I think, plays into, the old Lee Tressel axiom that the, severity of the punishment for the starter depends on the quality of the backup. The concern about the injury to the starter probably hinges somewhat on the quality of the backup. If you have two guys who you feel are, 1A and 1B, then you may be a little bit more willing to let those quarterbacks run, because if someone gets hurt, you still have a very, similar quality backup waiting in the wings where you might not have too much of a drop-off production-wise. I think last year, based on how much we saw CJ Stroud and what we saw from CJ Stroud, and then what we saw from Kyle McCord and how little we saw Kyle McCord, I think there was, I think that at least from Ryan Day's perspective, there was probably a more significant drop-off. It was not a 1A and 1B situation last year. It was a 1 and then a 2 and then a 3 last year. If you have the quality of the starter and the backup and the experience of the starter and the backup more similar, maybe you're a little bit more willing to take a few more of those risks. And so I think that does give Devin Brown a little bit of a leg up, and that is sort of an area where you may see him used situationally. You may see that be the thing that decides who wins the job if both guys are sort of equally skilled in passing and Devin Brown is better runner and they feel like that gives him a better element to their offense. To have the element of the quarterback run game in there, then sure, maybe that's a deciding factor.
I feel like there's been this over rebound thing based on the desire to have CJ Stroud run it. We've got this overreaction to now you must have the better runner. You didn't want. It's not like people were crying for CJ Stroud to be a 20 carry a game or 10 carry a game guy. They just wanted him to be a willing runner. So if that's all you want, if that's all you want your quarterback to be, then I think you don't need Devin Brown over Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord, you just want a willing runner. You want somebody who will go pick up the 6 yards if it's wide open or the 13 yards if it's wide open. Doesn't matter if he can turn that 6 yards into 20 yards or becomes part of the overall running game. You just wanted that guy to pick up some yards. I went back and watched some Kyle McCord high school stuff this yesterday just to see like how often did he do it. And it's not required much for him in that offense and what they were doing with him. He had Marvin Harrison in high school. So really you can just throw it up to Marvin and go, you don't need to run the ball. But he would roll out of the pocket and escape a lot like CJ Stroud does. But you just need somebody that is willing to go get it. And it doesn't have to be Doesn't mean you have to go get the 4.65 quarterback. The 4.82 quarterback can do just fine when anybody can go get the open yards. And so I just think this overreaction to running isn't necessary, and it's not going to be what decides the competition. They're not just going to go with now we've just got to overreact and go get the best runner. They're still going to go with the best guy who moves the ball and is safe with it and leads the team. And as these guys see that you can also lead and keep the chains moving by running the ball a little bit, I think they will both do that. Not in the spring, and not in the spring, mind you. But I think people just want a willing guy, a willing runner. And until I see that that's not Kyle McCord, I would assume that you'll be able to get that out of him as well.
Yeah, I think you're going to see Day being more willing to run the quarterback because you have two guys with sort of similar skill levels. I think we're at least assuming right now. And then also these guys are potentially maybe a little more willing to run, because if that is something that, if one guy brings that to the table, then he's going to bring it to the table. And then if the other guy, if you're the other guy and you're fighting for the position, you're going to be willing to run too, because if the other guy's bringing it to the table, you're going to want to, you're not going to want to have an area where you're deficient compared to the other guy. So yeah, I think I'm with you that you're going to see running there probably from both guys to at least a little bit more than you have in the past. It's not going to be, unless this is really like a tiebreaker situation, I don't think that's going to be the thing that solely decides it. And that kind of goes into our next question, also from Lance Not Lance. On the other side, assuming Kyle is the better passer, how much worse can Devin be at passing and still get the job because of his scrambling ability? I think the answer is basically none worse and to get the job, because the primary job of the quarterback is to be an effective passer, run the offense, move the offense down the field, keep things on track, keep things on schedule. Unless he is, Anthony Richardson, and I don't think he's going to be Anthony Richardson. The primary job of a quarterback in a Ryan Day offense is to distribute the ball effectively, and get the ball in the skill position players' hands. And he's gonna, you're gonna potentially be running a little bit, but if there's a drop off there from one to the other, I don't think you're going to see the lesser passer get the starting job. If it could be a tiebreaker if they are deemed, if at the end of the spring their accuracy and efficiency and all that kind of stuff is basically dead even, maybe it's a tiebreaker at that point. But I don't think it's going to be something that you're gonna take a guy who's completing 5% less of his passes than the other guy and be like, well, but he can run. That doesn't seem like that's how that's going to shake out.
You don't think with a wide receiver coach as the OC and 27 5-star receivers in the receiver room that they're going to go with the guy who runs a little bit better and completes fewer passes? I do think the ability to run a little bit better maybe creates some of those second chance plays, some scramble drills that end up in big plays. But I think you're still going to go with the best passer, because the best passer is the safest passer. The safer, the guy who isn't turning the ball over, that's always going to be key. Moving the chains, not turning it over, as Jim Tressel would say, ending every possession in a kick, be an extra point, field goal, or punt, that sort of thing. Not saying they need to go back to that, but you want the guy that you can trust the most, and that's who they will get. By the way, Tom, do you remember what the spring game stats were last year for Devin Brown and Kyle McCord?
Yes, off the top of my head, those are definitely numbers I remember. Why don't you tell the listeners what they were?
Are you going to fact check me with your memory?
Yes, I will. Please go ahead. I will see if you are right.
So, Kyle McCord was 14 of 20 for 129 yards with a touchdown, completing 70% of his passes. Devin Brown, 11 of 24 for 141 yards with a touchdown and an interception, 46% completion percentage. Actually, Kyle McCord was even better than C.J. Stroud. Kyle McCord, 14 of 20. C.J. Stroud, 14 of 22. I guess I would posit that Ryan Day, had he chosen to go with Kyle McCord last year, perhaps they win a national championship. Instead, they went with a proven guy who couldn't win in the playoffs with C.J. Stroud, as we know. But just to give you a little example of this won't be their first spring going against each other with Devin Brown and Kyle McCord, but obviously it will be their most important.
Well, and I think the other thing is those are the stats that we have. They track every snap of every practice and they have stuff for the 14 practices before the spring game, and several of those are scrimmages, which I think in general have been viewed as substantially more important than the spring game. The spring game is a little bit of a kind of exhibition, and you're tracking so many other things that you can have the guy who's not quite as good in the spring game still be the guy who is better on the whole in the spring, and that's, they kind of balance out the full stadium experience, and that means something, doing it in front of a bunch of people and not just in front of your teammates. But that's only one data point out of 15, and even when we get to go watch a couple practices in the spring, that's only 3 data points out of 15. So there's a lot of stuff that we don't get to see, and even if one of those guys completes again 18 for 24 in the spring game and the other guy is 14 for 24, that doesn't mean that the 14 for 24 guy is automatically not going to be the one who gets the starting job, because maybe he was better in a bunch of the other ones. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into this other than what you see, but in general, the general fan sentiment is often based on basically just that spring game, and that's not the whole picture there. Last one from @William McMillan. Will Day work out a tie at starting quarterback and use the first few games to work out who the starter is? Where have we seen that before? Also, limiting the possible transfer of one of those two. Where have we seen that before? Seems kind of like this might have happened someplace else, somewhere, sometime. Tony, this all sounds so vaguely familiar. Are we going to see it again here in Columbus in 2023?
And of course, the references to what happened at Michigan last year. And it all started, it could not have happened in a better way for Michigan, even though they still ended up losing Cade McNamara to an injury and then to the transfer. But remember, this started with J.J. McCarthy not being healthy in the spring. So they could not have a competition in the spring, meaning Cade McNamara could not yet lose his job and then transfer out before they had a chance to keep him. So they're not, I don't think, at this point, they're not going to have that scenario. And that was the ideal scenario for keeping both of those quarterbacks for at least a month. And then, of course, you pick which, and we talked about it at the time. This was Jim Harbaugh's plan. Gosh, I wonder who he wants starting at quarterback. And of course, we saw what happened there. So you could have a situation where it's like Ryan Day that would start. If he wants Devin Brown to not start, you start Devin Brown in the season opener against Indiana. And then you start Kyle McCord in the second game against, I don't know, is it Youngstown State or whoever it is. And then, oh boy, well, I mean, the results are right there. My hands are tied in terms of who I'm picking. And so, the players earned their way, and we're going to do what what we see as the evidence is there. One guy threw for 300 yards against a Division I team, and the other guy threw for 175 against a Division I team. What are we supposed to do? But no, I don't. And I don't think that's what happens, even though I thought it was, I don't want to say brilliant because we're talking about Jim Harbaugh, but it was brilliant for Jim Harbaugh, and it worked in a sense.
Well, and if you look at who Michigan played last year, it was UConn and Hawaii in the first 2 games, I believe. And UConn and Hawaii were 2 of the 5 to 10 worst teams in all of FBS, was at least the impression before the season, and UConn ended up getting to 6 wins. But if you look at who they beat, it was like, okay, so it was maybe the 90th and 123rd worst teams in the country. Indiana is not great, but it's a road game. It's a Big Ten game. You're not going to screw around with that stuff with a Big Ten game on the start of the schedule. If it was Youngstown State in Western Kentucky, maybe theoretically you could have that conversation. You're not going to do that with a Big Ten road game to start, and then Notre Dame looming in week 4. That's not going to be something that they're going to want to mess around with. And with both guys being there in the spring, you're going to have a decent sense probably for where things stand. And if it goes into the fall, it goes into the fall. But I think that just solely the fact that you have Indiana on the schedule week 1, and then you've got another road game at Notre Dame week 4, you're going to want whoever's going to be starting that Notre Dame game to have the road starting game experience. Indiana is not the most hostile atmosphere in the world, but you're going to want to have that a little, that in their minds and that in their, in their toolbox already, having started a game on the road. And so, yeah, I don't think this was really a serious question. I think this is, and the Michigan thing was such a unique circumstance last year based on, like you said, the injury to McCarthy in the spring, and then also the fact that they were playing 2 gimmies at the start of the season. That's something that is not going to work very often, and it happened to work out for Michigan, but I don't think it's going to work out like that for Ohio State.
No, and as Ryan Day said, they'd like to have an idea of who their starting quarterback is coming out of the spring. That would allow them to go into the off-season workouts with, a designated leader. I don't think I expect that to happen, Tom. I don't think you expect that to happen, do you?
No, I don't think you're going to have a clear-cut number one. I mean, if you do, is it because one guy was so unbelievably incredibly good or because one guy was so unbelievably incredibly bad? It feels like it would have to be someone being so incredibly mind-blowingly good that there's no possible way the other person could catch them, and there's no real argument for continuing it. Maybe we'll see that. I feel like we haven't seen enough of these guys over the last year and a half to really know. I mean, most of our data on Kyle McCord comes from a game against Akron a year and a half ago, which, sure, but it was Akron and they were one of the worst teams in the country. So, Tony, that would be like deciding your quarterback battle against UConn and Hawaii to bring things back.
I do wonder if every time we get to see them this spring, if it's the same guy at quarterback with the ones, like when it was CJ Stroud and Jack Miller, it was always like, oh no, they're in a complete total battle, but it was always CJ Stroud that we'd see with the ones going first and doing everything. And so it's like, I know you're saying that, but we've never seen Jack Miller with the ones, and Ryan Day would be, oh no, no, he's getting time with them. Yeah, no, he's getting time with them. And so now I don't know how much we'll see, but I would expect we'll see both guys. I don't know if it's a 60-40 just when we're seeing it. And again, we won't see a ton. I would expect to see more back and forth with the ones than we saw in 2021 with CJ Stroud and Jack Miller.
Yeah, almost certainly. I can't imagine you're not going to. I mean, and you go back to Justin Fields in 2019. It was kind of the same thing where it's like, oh, it's still an open competition. It's like, is it? It doesn't. I mean, if it wasn't an open competition and if the job had basically been decided right now, like this is a lot like what that would look like. And it was the same thing with CJ Stroud where you kind of went into the spring and it was like, well, it's an open competition, but CJ Stroud is about a minus 240 favorite right now to win the starting job. So it's, less open than it might otherwise have been. So yeah, it's this one feels like this is at least, we are going to see both guys with the ones for sure this spring, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Ryan Day talking about how it's still wide open with Justin Fields. I'd be like, I don't know if you should be a professional quarterback coach or evaluator, because we were there for one spring practice, and I'm telling you, Justin Fields is a lot better. Like it was clear to us, non-professionals, and you're still trying to decide. I'm not sure if you're the guy for the job, if you can't just look at these two guys in one practice and figure it out. But I mean, eventually he did decide correctly, or somebody told him. I'm not sure.
We know he listens to the podcast. We know we talked about who should be the starting quarterback. I mean, I don't want to connect the dots for you, but
thank you for doing that, though, Tom. Thank you for connecting the dots. Anything else before we go?
No, I think we're good, and we'll do our very best to not tell you who's leading all spring, so that we can maintain the air of mystery and not influence the competition this year unduly.
We don't want to decide the starting quarterback for them. So yes, thank you all for joining us. As always, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Say hello to us there on the message board right now. Today, Mark Givler has his chat going. I'm sure Tom and I and others will pop in there and give our own thoughts, because obviously we can't just let one person control the narrative around here. So we'll be there. And also you can find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle for all of our videos that we drop and live streams and shows and such. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys later.